Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. The thin light of street lamps, barely breaking through the curtains, played on the walls of the Reed House. The evening in Chicago turned out to be cool, although autumn was just beginning to take hold. Emily could feel the cold creeping through the window glass, despite the heating. She sighed, closed the curtain, and returned to the kitchen. The smell of fresh basil and rosemary hung in the air. Emily loved cooking Italian cuisine, especially pasta with juicy tomatoes. But now, stirring the sauce in the pan with a spoon, it was as if she was doing it on autopilot. Her thoughts flew somewhere into the distance, to memories of those days when laughter and lightness reigned in the house, when Jacob was waiting for her from work at the doorstep with flowers and did not return exhausted in the dead of night. She looked at the old photographs lying on the table. In one photo, she and Jacob 10 years ago, happy, young, smiling with Lake Michigan in the background. They had just gotten married, and the whole world lay at their feet. Then every evening was filled with conversations, plans for the future, small but important discoveries about each other. And now, Emily was lost in thought when the phone rang. Picking up the phone, she heard her husband's familiar but distant voice. "Hi," Jacob's voice sounded tired. "I'm going to be late. We have a glitch in the system." "Again?" she asked, trying not to show disappointment. "Yes, sorry, don't wait for me with dinner. I'll probably be back closer to midnight." He paused. "Are you okay?" "It's okay," she answered briefly. Was everything really okay? Probably not. But Emily didn't have the strength to talk about how lonely she was in their common home, that she was tired of asking herself why they hadn't talked like before for a long time. She heard Jacob sigh. "I'm really trying. It's just a lot of work. Will you be patient?" "Of course," Emily squeezed out and, without waiting for an answer, hung up. She sat down tiredly on a chair. This conversation seemed to repeat itself day after day. He apologizes. She says, "Of course," and everything remains the same. Emily turned off the stove and set the food aside. "I lost my appetite." Instead of eating, she took the photo from the table and remembered how Jacob had once looked at her with loving eyes. She wanted to cry, but she pressed her lips together. Tears won't solve the problem. In the living room, a wall was decorated with her own design ideas, a soft pastel palette combined with a few bright spots of abstract paintings. Emily's talent and taste for interior design has been evident since childhood, and she began designing as soon as she entered college. But for some reason, the home remained cold, despite the cozy pillows and pleasant colors. Feeling that she could not sit in the empty house, she walked through the rooms. The matrimonial bedroom looked impersonal. A neatly made bed, Jacob's desk with a bunch of diagrams and drawings. Everything said that this space was once created for a family, but now it has turned into a warehouse for two parallel lives. Catching her reflection in the mirror, Emily noticed the fatigue in her own eyes. At 32, she seemed older than herself. Her bright green eyes had once sparkled with curiosity, but now they were filled with doubt and pain. "What happened to us?" she asked quietly, turning to the reflection. As if in response, a car alarm blared somewhere on the street. Emily shuddered and ran out of the bedroom, slamming the door behind her as if trying to hide from her own thoughts. "I guess I just need to get through this day," she said quietly to herself. It was already dark when Emily, having changed into pajamas, heard the quiet opening of the front door. Jacob tried not to make any noise. Approaching the bedroom, he noticed that the light had been turned off. I tiptoed into the bathroom, then into the kitchen. I saw the untouched dinner neatly put away on the shelf and involuntarily frowned. She didn't have dinner again, a thought flashed through her mind. He turned off the kitchen light and returned to the bedroom. Trying not to wake Emily, he undressed and lay down next to her. She seemed to be breathing evenly in her sleep, but in the darkness it seemed to him that her eyes were slightly open, and he caught a vague shine. "Are you awake?" he asked quietly. There was no answer, and Jacob did not insist. He exhaled heavily, realizing that perhaps she didn't want to talk, or just tired. Maybe it's better to put everything off until tomorrow. In the darkness of the room between them lay an endless wall of silence and unexpressed feelings. They lay back to back, each immersed in their own internal dialogue, afraid or hesitant to speak. And thus they spent another night together, but at the same time infinitely far from each other. The next morning, Emily was the first to wake up. She loved the early hours when she could longer in bed and let the sun's rays touch her face. Jacob was sleeping, his face looking tired and his shoulders tense even in his sleep. Emily sighed and, without touching her husband, went to make coffee. In the living room were sketches of the projects she had been developing yesterday. New clients were rare, but this order seemed interesting, designing an exhibition gallery for a photographer whose name Emily had not yet revealed. A certain Nathan Collins, sent to her as a potential partner by an art director she knew. The gallery itself was located in one of Chicago's historic buildings, and the client wanted something modern, but without losing its classic elegance. Emily had already imagined a combination of metal structures and vintage elements. She threw herself into her work, sipping her coffee in small sips. A couple of times during the morning, she glanced at the bedroom. Was everything all right with Jacob? But he didn't come out. When he finally appeared in the kitchen, she noticed shadows under his eyes, reflecting sleepless nights and constant stress. "Hello," she said. "Hi," he replied, nodding slightly. There was a long pause. They seemed to not know what to talk about. It was as if they were strangers who happened to be in the same room. "I made coffee," Emily pointed to the mug. Jacob shuddered a little, as if he had come to his senses. "Thank you." He sat down at the table, took a sip of coffee, and felt the bitter taste. He liked his coffee stronger, but didn't say anything. Something inside him said that this was not the time to find fault with trifles, and indeed now everything seemed insignificant compared to the abyss that yawned between them. "Are you having a hard day today?" Emily asked, trying to somehow keep the conversation going. "Yes, we need to check one project. Anyway, I'll probably be back late." "I see," Emily answered shortly. "Sorry," Jacob said suddenly and looked into her eyes. "I know that you—" Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to say that yes, she was lonely, that yes, she couldn't live like this anymore. But instead she muttered, "Everything is fine." He was about to add something, but changed his mind. He looked at his watch. "I have to go." "See you," she replied, knowing full well that evening would be late at night. He stood up, put on his jacket, hastily kissed her on the cheek, and left. This kiss was more of a habit than a manifestation of passion. Emily stood in the corridor, looking at the closed door, and felt bitterness and emptiness. Emily arrived at her workplace around 10 in the morning. Her own office, which she shared with two other designers, occupied several bright rooms in an old building on the outskirts of the center. It was quiet there, and it helped me concentrate. Once inside, she took off her coat and rolled up her sleeves. She wanted to immerse herself in work as much as possible to take her mind off home. Emily, Linda, her colleague, turned to her. They called about a new project, something about a photo exhibition. "It seems that we have agreed on a meeting for today at 1 o'clock in the afternoon." "Oh, right, thank you," Emily nodded. "We need to check everything." Opening her laptop, she saw a letter from the art director of the gallery with detailed information about the exhibition. Photographs of Nathan Collins, travel, people, emotions. Judging by the description, Nathan specialized in reportage and artistic photography. He has many works from Europe, South America, and Asia. Free spirit, Emily thought. She imagined a man always running around with a camera, capturing images of life. She became interested. Such a project was new after a series of boring orders for office interiors and apartment renovations. Here it was necessary to combine the aesthetics of photographs with the atmosphere of the exhibition space, and the client had some pretty bold ideas. Metal structures, hanging canvases, some play of light and shadow. By lunchtime, Emily was already completely immersed in thinking about how to arrange viewing areas and how to position the backlight to emphasize the depth of the photographs. She made a few sketches when her cell phone rang. "Emily Reed," she answered, trying to sound professional. "Hello, this is Nathan Collins. I was given your number as the designer who will design my exhibition. I hope you don't mind me calling directly." There was a slight smile in the voice. "No, no, it's okay," Emily responded. "How can I help?" "I want to meet and discuss the details in person, if you don't mind. I would like to know how you see my collection because I am very picky about setting up space, lighting, and so on." "Of course. I just have time after lunch. I plan to be there, inspecting the gallery." "Great. Then I'll see you there at about 1 to 20. I'll be a little late. My shooting ends at 1 o'clock." "Of course," Emily agreed, and they briefly exchanged goodbyes. After hanging up the phone, she felt a slight excitement. A new project had always been an opportunity for her to escape and feel like she was alive. And the excitement was pleasant, creative. How long has it been since she felt anything like this in her personal life? At exactly 1 o'clock, Emily was already standing at the entrance to the gallery, looking around. She walked around the room, making notes on a notebook, noting where installations could be installed. Suddenly, I heard footsteps and coughing behind me. She turned around, and in front of her stood a man of about 34, tall, slightly unshaven, and with a serious but open look. "Emily Reed?" he asked, smiling. "Yes, you must be Nathan Collins." She extended her hand, and he shook it confidently. "Nice to meet you in person." He looked around. "What do you think about space?" "He has charm," Emily replied, tucking the notebook into her bag. "But it will take a lot of work to enhance the character of the place." "Your collection. Are these travel photographs?" "Basically, yes, but there is also a series of portraits. I want to show not just beautiful landscapes, but the emotions of the people I encountered. Eyes, facial expressions, the essence of the moment." Emily felt his enthusiasm rub off on her. There was genuine passion for his work in his voice, which immediately caught your eye. They discussed the details for some time, noted the positions of the stands, and looked at the old arches. "How long have you been designing?" Nathan asked when they fell silent for a while. "Since my youth, to be honest." She graduated from college in Chicago, then worked in the studio of a designer. "But a few years ago, I decided to go free swimming." "I heard that it's brave to go on a free voyage," he remarked with a slight smile. "But you seem to like risks." "I used to love you," Emily corrected him, lowering her gaze. "Right now, I'm just doing my job." "But I can't do it without risk," he admitted. "When I pick up a camera, I need to feel the adrenaline. Let it be an unsafe area, a foreign country, a dangerous height. I need movement, energy." "It sounds like you always go where there is danger," she said in surprise. "Maybe it's not very prudent, but I can't do it any other way." She caught the sparkle vibrating in his voice. Suddenly, she wondered what it would be like to live like this, freely, without fear of taking risks. "Okay," Nathan concluded, "let's agree on a work schedule. You can provide several sketches, right?" "Yes, sure. I already have some sketches, but I'll finalize them by next week and show you." "Great. I'll be looking forward to it." He smiled again. There was a moment of glance between them, which lasted a little longer than is usually the case with business partners. Emily felt a slight tingling sensation in her chest, as if from the touch of the wind. Something is wrong, she thought, and took a step back, regaining distance. "Then we'll contact you closer to the middle of the week," she concluded dryly, trying to regain her businesslike tone. "With pleasure." Nathan put the camera in his bag. "Thank you for the meeting. Glad we're on the same page." Emily nodded, adjusting her bag on her shoulder, and quickly walked towards the exit. My legs suddenly seemed heavier than usual, and my heart seemed to be beating a little faster. She didn't understand what hurt her so much about this man. Maybe it's his energy, his confidence, unlike Jacob's reserve. However, she tried to push these thoughts aside as she walked outside. There is a lot of work ahead, and there is no need to add personal colors to what should be simply business interaction. She needed the opportunity to create, and Nathan was just the key to a new project, nothing more. Nevertheless, a slight aftertaste from the meeting followed her for a long time throughout the day. Late evening at the Reed house found Emily alone again. It was already about 11 o'clock, and Jacob still wasn't there. Emily stood at the window, looking at the rare cars driving along the street. With every minute, the tension inside her only grew. When the door finally slammed in the corridor, she looked out of the living room. "Jacob?" He responded with a dissatisfied grunt, kicking off his shoes, clearly exhausted. Emily walked out into the corridor. "Did you have dinner somewhere? I can warm you up." She began, but he interrupted. "No need, I ate in the office. We had urgent work to correct the drawings." He really looked so tired that he didn't even have the strength to be irritated. Emily, listening to herself, realized that she was also tired of waiting, tired of thinking how they could get back what was before. "Maybe we can talk while she tried. "I'm not in that state right now." Jacob waved him off. "Give me a minute, I'll change." He walked into the bedroom, leaving Emily confused. She sat down on the sofa and covered her face with her hands. Tears came to her eyes, but she held back again. A few minutes later, Jacob came out in his home clothes and sat down opposite her without looking at her. "How are things going with your work?" he asked almost mechanically. "Not bad. A new exhibition design project," she answered, trying to detect even a drop of interest in his voice. "Exhibitions? Who's?" "Photographer, Nathan Collins." "I didn't hear," Jacob said and stopped short. "Well, I'm glad you have something interesting." And again, there was silence. Emily felt herself begin to shake from the understatement. "Jacob," she began quietly, "I don't know what's happening to us, but we hardly talk anymore. You're always late. I'm also busy, but it hurts me that we don't have normal communication." Jacob rubbed his hands over his face as if trying to relieve the tension. "I'm doing the best I can, Emily. I have. You have no idea what responsibility. And yes, I understand that you are suffering, but I'm tired too. Do you think it's easy for me? Is it my fault that work takes so much time?" Her heart sank. She felt both his fatigue and her pain. "But you don't even try a little," she said, and a tear broke out in her voice. "When was the last time we just sat together? When did you hug? Do you remember?" "Listen," he raised his eyes, which showed hopelessness. "What should I do? I'm doing the best I can, and I'm sorry that I don't have enough strength. Do we have alternative options? Do you want me to quit? Then we'll run aground." Emily wanted to object that it wasn't about the money at all, but she understood. He was already internally closed. He was waiting for her to attack, and he would have to defend himself. She got up from the sofa. "I don't want to quarrel now. I'm just cold inside these walls." Jacob looked away. "I understand," he answered dryly. "Forgive me if you can." He stood up and went into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. Emily was left alone. She knew that the conversation was not over and that there was great tension between them. The image of Nathan popped into my head, his open smile, lightness, and this made her feel double guilt. She compared her husband with a stranger and thought how much easier it was for her to talk with Nathan about anything than with her beloved husband about important things. "What's wrong with me?" she repeated mentally. Later that night, not wanting to suffer in the silence of their shared bed, Emily dialed her friend Sarah's number. Sarah always helped out when things were bad. What happened?" She heard her friend's half-asleep voice. "It's almost midnight." "Sorry," Emily whispered, "but I need to talk." "Of course," Sarah answered, concern appearing in her voice. "What happened?" she asked. Emily briefly recounted the last part of her life. Jacob's constant delays, lack of attention, cold, conflict, her fatigue and inner emptiness. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or sighing quietly. "It sounds like you're both just tired and can't see a way out," Sarah said. "But he exists, doesn't he?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, lowering her head. "It seems to me that we missed the moment when we could fix everything." And now, everything has gone too far. You were such a strong couple. Maybe you need outside help, family psychologist, or just try to start over, go on dates together, travel. He doesn't want to go anywhere, Sarah. He says there is no time, no strength. He turns into a robot, disappearing into his work, and I can't bring him back. I think he doesn't love me, or maybe I'm his. Emily suddenly stopped, realizing that she had uttered a terrifying thought out loud. Don't rush to conclusions, her friend interrupted. Sometimes it's just a crisis. Many couples go through it. After all, you've been married for 10 years, it's no joke. Emily nodded, trying to calm down. But doubts and fears raged inside her. Having agreed with her friend, Emily went to bed, but tossed and turned in bed for a long time. The next day, Emily decided to dive into her work, sit down and finalize the sketches for the exhibition. Immersed in the creative process, she sometimes forgot about family problems. Nathan's photography style gave her a lot of ideas. She wanted to make the gallery space dynamic, reflecting the pulse of his photographs. By midday, she had already created several sketches on the computer and decided to go into the city to look at samples of materials. Walking past the kitchen, I automatically glanced at my phone and saw a message. "Hi, this is Nathan. I'm going to an interesting place to film. If you want, join me, I'll show you how I work, and maybe give you ideas for design. I'll be waiting at the entrance to Lincoln Park at 3. Emily was surprised, but at the same time she felt curious. Why not? Perhaps this will benefit the project. She agreed, quickly had a snack, and went to the named place. She arrived a little before 3. The park was filled with people, despite the cool weather. Emily herself had not been here for a long time. She looked at the couples and caught herself thinking that in her life, there had not been such leisurely romantic walks for a long time. Soon she saw Nathan. He was standing at the entrance, holding his camera at the ready, watching with obvious pleasure what was happening around him. "Hi," Emily said to him, slightly embarrassed. "I'm glad I came," he smiled. "Do you see these guys with easels? They participate in a small street festival. They paint the park live. And I wanted to make a report about how art is taking over public space." She looked in the direction Nathan was pointing. Several students and art enthusiasts were seated on the benches and grass, concentrating on the scenery. "Looks great," Emily said. "I didn't even know that such events were taking place here." "Chicago is full of surprises," Nathan winked. "Shall we go?" They moved deeper into the park. Nathan stopped every now and then to take a few pictures. Emily watched him become engrossed in the process. He talked with artists, asked questions, and joked. It seemed that people opened up in front of his lens, stopped being shy, and saw his sincere interest. "Do you always find contact with people so easily?" Emily asked when they moved a little to the side. "Perhaps, yes. I'm interested in how people feel. And when you are sincerely interested in a person, he feels it and relaxes." "I'm jealous," she admitted. "I often can't talk to strangers." "Everything comes with practice," he smiled. "Plus, I have an excuse. I'm a photographer. I document your life." People usually respond better than if I just walked up from the street. Emily nodded, furtively looking at his profile, sharply outlined by the light of the evening sun. He seemed so spontaneous, alive, and it contrasted with the way she was used to interacting with Jacob lately. They walked around half the park, and Nathan showed her several more interesting locations. At some point, they stopped at an old gazebo surrounded by flowers. "Look how the sun falls at an angle," he pointed out. "Look how the leaves are illuminated." Emily looked at the play of light and shadows, and suddenly the same creative excitement that she had not felt for a long time awoke in her. Nathan took a few pictures and then turned sharply to her. "Do you want me to take a couple of portraits?" Emily recoiled for a split second. But I hate being photographed." "It's okay," he reassured. "I just wanted to show how you can capture a natural expression. I won't force you to pose like a model, I promise." Emily hesitated, but decided, why not? She stood next to the gazebo, leaned on a column, trying to look at ease. Nathan settled in with the camera. Just look at me, he said quietly. She looked into his eyes, and at that same second, he clicked the camera. Okay, now look into the distance, he added, and she looked away somewhere toward the trees. Another click of the shutter. Emily felt a strange lightness, and then suddenly a pang of conscience. In front of her is an unfamiliar man with a camera, and she feels some kind of joy from this attention. That's enough, she said, interrupting the filming. Nathan lowered the camera. Thank you. Sorry if I invaded your space. No, everything is fine, she answered, looking to the side. I'm just not used to being the center of attention. Understand? And you manage to be natural when you don't try. She nodded, feeling her heartbeat a little faster. Was it really just a few minutes ago that she felt so comfortable next to this almost stranger? The time was approaching 6 in the evening. They left the park and Emily was about to say goodbye when Nathan suggested, "Maybe we can have some coffee. There is an excellent coffee shop nearby. I would be happy to discuss the details of the project while the ideas are fresh." Probably yes, she agreed, reminding herself that all this was in the interests of the exhibition. On the way to the coffee shop, they talked animatedly about how best to arrange the photos and how to emphasize the concept of travel. Nathan talked about his trips, the mountains of Peru, the streets of Paris, Indian bazaars. And Jacob, your husband, right? He suddenly asked when their conversation took a more personal turn. Does he also like traveling? I used to love you. We once went to Canada, to Niagara Falls, and then there were plans for Europe, but they remained plans, Emily answered, trying to speak evenly. Now his work comes first, so travel has taken a back seat. It's a shame, Nathan remarked. She felt that she did not want to talk about her problems. It would look pathetic. Here I have a husband who doesn't understand me, and here I am walking with an unfamiliar photographer. No, she shouldn't complain. They chose a table by the window and ordered a cup of cappuccino. Emily looked at Nathan and noticed the glare of the streetlights reflected in his eyes. It was felt that he lived in the present moment, catching the nuances of the world around him. How do you like my pictures? He asked, showing several frames from the park on the camera screen. Emily looked. The photographs were truly atmospheric. Pure colors, emotions on people's faces, amazing play of light. Excellent. You have a talent for conveying moods. Thank you, he smiled and looked at her. You are also talented in your own way. I saw your sketches. You have a taste for detail and the ability to create a space you want to immerse yourself in. Emily felt warm at the compliment. This is my passion, she admitted. I love design because it helps people feel comfortable and inspired in a space. You talk about work with such enthusiasm, he remarked. It's nice to see that there are people who are really passionate about their work. She lowered her eyes to the cup. Yes, I'm burning, but why don't I feel at home? Flashed through my head. They had a casual conversation, and time flew by. At some point, Emily looked at the clock and realized that it was already 7 in the evening. I have to go, she said, standing up. I still need to stop by home, and then maybe I'll pop into the office. Nathan walked her to the exit. Thanks for the company. It was great to talk, and I believe our exhibition will be great. I think so too, Emily replied. See you soon. They exchanged glances of affection that made Emily's heart clench with an unsettling mixture of pleasure and guilt. When she went outside and got into the car, her hands were shaking. She couldn't figure out if this was just a professional collaboration or something dangerous that hinted at a deeper connection. But her mind told her to focus on her marriage, on how to save her relationship with Jacob. And yet that evening, as she returned home, she couldn't stop thinking about how easy it was to communicate with Nathan, how natural she felt around him. The next morning was cloudy. From dawn, gray clouds hung over Chicago, from which light rain soon began to fall. Emily sat in her car parked outside the office and listened to the raindrops on the roof. Usually she loved the rain, finding a certain melancholy beauty in it. But today I only felt a pressing weight on my heart. The conversation with Jacob the night before didn't work out. He returned later than she did and seemed to be in a bad mood, and she was hesitant to discuss anything after the work meeting. They seemed to have become accustomed to living in the skip the conversation until next time mode. Emily took a deep breath, got out of the car under an umbrella, and quickly ran into the building so as not to get wet. Linda met her at the office. "Hello, are you okay? You look a little tired." "It's okay," Emily lied, shrugging. "It's just the weather." Having settled down at her desk, she began answering emails and checking orders. And then I saw a new letter from the art director. "We need a meeting with Nathan today to agree on budgets and deadlines." She texted Nathan, suggesting they meet at a coffee shop near the office. They agreed on 5 in the evening. She worked all day, trying not to think about personal things, but memories of yesterday's walk popped up in her head again and again. At 5 o'clock, Emily was already waiting at the table. The rain intensified, streams of water flowed down the glass of the coffee shop, and the noise of passing cars could be heard from the street every now and then. She ordered herself a latte and thought about what she would tell Nathan. He walked in, brushing raindrops off his jacket, and smiled brightly again when he noticed her. He was wearing a simple shirt and jeans. Everything was wet from the downpour, but he looked like he wasn't bothered at all. "Hello, I hope you're not too wet," he said, sitting down. "Well, I guess not. I ordered myself a coffee. What are you going to do?" "Perhaps a latte too," he replied. When the waiter left, they got down to business. They discussed the estimate, the exhibition installation schedule, and the logistics of printing photographs in large format. "We will need to ensure that the hanging structures are installed correctly," Emily said, pointing to the printed sketches. "I have already contacted the contractors. If everything goes according to plan, we'll be done in a week." "Sounds great," Nathan nodded, studying the papers. They immersed themselves in the details. But when the official questions exhausted themselves, Nathan somehow casually changed the topic. "You said that you have been working as a designer for a long time. But why this particular area? What attracts you to her?" She leaned back in her chair. "Since childhood, I loved rearranging furniture, decorating spaces, and drawing endless house plans. I like to feel how space can affect a person's mood." "Interesting. What about yourself? Who influences your own mood?" She thought about it. Is he really asking about her husband, or does it hint at something else? "Ideally, on my own," she grinned, "but we are all surrounded by people who shape us. Friends, family." Nathan looked at her carefully, and it seemed to Emily that he saw her deeper than she was used to allowing. "Something is bothering you," he said quietly when she fell silent. "I see it in your eyes." She flushed. This is too personal a question, she thought, but for some reason she answered. "Every person has their own difficulties. This is life." He nodded. "Yes, that's right. I just wanted to say that sometimes it helps to talk to a stranger who is not involved in your problems. I know how to listen, if anything." "Thank you," Emily replied gratefully. "I'll remember this." She felt that there was danger in this simplicity and attention. They get too close too quickly. And this is wrong because she has a husband, no matter how bad things get. "That's what I thought." Nathan changed the subject, sensing her tension. "When we finish with the documents, maybe we can go see the hall itself again. I want to discuss the details of where exactly the photo racks will be placed." "Good idea," she agreed. The rain had subsided a little when they reached the gallery. They walked around the empty walls, discussing possible placement scenarios, and again figured out which lamps to use. At some point, they stopped in the far corner, at one of the arches. "Yes, she will greet visitors," Nathan agreed. "And over there," he pointed to the right, "we will post a series that is related to street photography. I want people to see the contrast." Suddenly, he turned to Emily. The reflection of her eyes showed a soft, wavering light. They literally froze for a moment, looking at each other in the silence of the half-empty hall. "You know," he said quietly, "I like you as a person, as a person. I feel some kind of connection with you." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She did not expect such a direct confession, although she had a presentiment inside that he might say something similar. Nathan, she said, trying to sound decisive, I have a husband. He smiled sadly. I know. I'm not asking you for anything. Just wanted to be honest. She swallowed the lump in her throat. I appreciate your honesty, but let's maintain a working relationship. He nodded. Understand. Sorry if I put you in an awkward position. But it was clear in his gaze that he did not regret his words. At this tense moment, their conversation ended. They, almost without speaking, headed for the exit, and each thought about his own. As they left the gallery, the rain began to pick up again, and they decided to go to a small 24-hour cafe on the corner for shelter. It was light and quiet inside. They each took a cup of tea to warm up. Sorry about my words there, Nathan repeated, quietly stirring the sugar with a spoon. But sometimes I can't keep what I feel inside. I, I don't want to lie either, Emily answered, looking down at her mug. I like you. But understand, I'm going through a difficult period with my husband right now, and I don't want to complicate things. I understand, he nodded, and I respect your position. They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the rain pattering on the windows. Emily wanted to get up and leave, but at the same time she felt something holding her next to him. You know, said Nathan, life is so short, and we often deny ourselves what can give us happiness. But, of course, everyone has their own truth. Yes, mine, Emily repeated, not knowing what else to say. When the rain subsided a little, they left the cafe and said goodbye on the street. Walking a few steps, she turned around and saw that he was looking after her, then slowly turned his head to the side and left. Lord, what am I doing? She whispered to herself. Getting into the car, she leaned her head on the steering wheel, feeling her heart beating in her chest. Her conscience screamed that she should keep her distance and think about saving her family. But inside she so wanted warmth. Returning late in the evening, Emily did not find Jacob. A small light was burning in the kitchen, giving the room a dim glow. She felt terribly tired mentally. Now she just wanted to talk to her husband, try to explain herself, say how afraid she was of losing their connection, and ask that they try to find a way out together. But all she saw was dark rooms and silence. The feeling of emptiness was so strong that she could not help but cry right there, leaning against the wall. Tears flowed, mixed with irritation at themselves, at Jacob, at the fact that they had lost touch. A piercing wind from Lake Michigan was whipping up the clouds, and more rain was about to break out over the city. Emily got out of the car near the small school where her best friend Sarah worked. The schoolyard was already empty, classes were over, and only the teachers on duty were still discussing something in the corridors. Emily, shrugging her shoulders from the cold, walked inside and headed towards the elementary school office, where Sarah usually stayed after school. Sarah sat at the teacher's desk, neatly stacking the children's notebooks. Seeing Emily, she looked up and smiled. Hello? You're early today. Everything is fine. I wanted to see you, Emily admitted, closing the door behind her. Tell me what's going on with me. Sarah frowned, seeing the serious expression on her friend's face. Take a seat. Did something happen? Emily sat down on the high chair next to the desk. For a moment, I felt like a little girl who came to the teacher to confess, and the situation in her life resembled some kind of ongoing puzzle. She felt that she didn't know what to do. You know I have problems with Jacob, she began carefully. But since then, everything has only become more complicated. You see, I have a new project. I am helping to design an exhibition for one photographer. And Sarah leaned forward more carefully. And what? Emily paused, he's showing interest in me. And I can't say that this is only on his part. I, too, feel something like that. But this is wrong, she sighed heavily. You once told me that you had an affair, but I don't know the details. Can you tell me how it was? Sarah lowered her eyes for a few seconds, as if internally gathering her thoughts. Then she said quietly, Fine, if it helps you, I'll tell you. She stood up and closed the office door so that no one would hear. She returned, leaning on the edge of the teacher's table. It was about 3 years ago, she began, carefully choosing her words. I met one man, he seemed kind, cheerful, and confident. And yes, he was married. Then he said that everything was bad with his wife. Supposedly, they were even going to divorce. I was a fool and believed it because I wanted to believe. Sarah fell silent and looked somewhere into space, as if reliving those events. We spent several months together, secret meetings, dinners in restaurants, trips out of town. I felt like I was on a roller coaster. On the one hand, I understood that I was doing something immoral, but on the other hand, I was inspired by feelings. But then everything collapsed. He didn't even think about divorce, he was just looking for a hobby. I fell for his bait and ended up left with nothing. His wife found out about everything, and a terrible scandal arose. He begged me not to say too much, but rumors reached the school principal. Then many in the team stopped saying hello to me, gossip began. I barely got over it. Emily felt her heart clench with every word. She could imagine how painful it all was. Sarah always seemed like a person with a strong character, but this story seems to have broken her. I was so ashamed, Sarah continued. I'm ashamed of myself, of his wife, of the parents of my students. I felt fallen, worthless. I couldn't recover from this for a long time. I was thinking about quitting, leaving Chicago. But in the end, I stayed, I coped, but there is still a residue. Emily was confused. Sorry to remind you of this. I'm just at a crossroads now. I look at Nathan, and it seems to me that we are close. We understand each other. But at the same time, I have Jacob. I guess I'm just looking for emotions that are missing in marriage. Sarah responded by coming closer and hugging Emily. I don't want you to repeat my mistake. Understand that any affair on the side begins with euphoria and ends with pain for everyone. If your marriage can be saved, you need to fight, and not look for a replacement for feelings outside of it. Even if the husband is now distant, this is not a reason to rush into the pool. Emily felt a lump in her throat. She knew Sarah was right. But the internal conflict did not disappear. She had feelings that she could not so easily suppress. Thank you for sharing, she said quietly, looking down. I'll try to listen to you. Sarah squeezed her hand. I don't blame you, Em. Every person has the right to choose. Everything just has consequences. Don't make mistakes. Try to reach your husband and restore your connection. They hugged again. At that moment, there was a knock on the office door. Some colleague of Sarah looked inside and asked something about the reports. Realizing that the conversation was interrupted, Emily stood up to say goodbye. I'll go, I won't interfere. Thanks for listening. I'm always happy to help, Sarah assured. And remember, don't hide from the truth. Talk to Jacob, try to get everything back. Maybe it's not too late. However, leaving school, Emily realized that she did not have a ready answer on how exactly to fix everything. She wanted to believe that family happiness was still possible, but at the same time thoughts about Nathan became stronger and stronger against her will. That evening, Emily called her husband again. Surprisingly, Jacob quickly responded. Yes, Emily? Hello. When will you be home? I think it's closer to 9, he answered wearily. We're finishing up the last edits on the project, and I'm just overwhelmed. She wanted to ask him to have dinner together or something, but there was a rush in Jacob's voice, and he immediately added, Let's talk when I come. Okay, she said quietly. After hanging up, Emily felt even more lost. It's easy for Sarah to give advice, she thought, but I don't know if Jacob is ready to change anything in our lives, and am I ready myself? She sat on the sofa until nightfall, but when the clock hand passed midnight, Jacob still did not appear. As in recent weeks, he returned when she was already in bed. The morning in Jacob's office began with the usual bustle. Colleagues were running around with drawings, someone was loudly discussing the latest edits, and the smell of coffee and nervous tension was in the air. In recent months, he had been living under constant stress, balancing between deadlines and responsibility for a project that could either take his career to the next level or bury all his efforts. Today was that very day, the final presentation to the customer. Jacob stood in front of a huge screen displaying diagrams and graphs and methodically explained every detail. His voice sounded confident, although inside he felt his heart pounding with excitement. Colleagues sitting around the table nodded occasionally, and the project manager, Mark, listened attentively, occasionally making notes on a notepad. And here, Jacob pointed to the diagram, we optimized the cooling system, which reduced energy costs by 15%. It wasn't easy, but we managed it. When he finished, silence fell in the room. Mark put down his pen, looked at him, and smiled. Jacob, that's damn impressive. You and your team did an incredible job. The customer will be delighted. The others applauded, some even clapped Jacob on the shoulder. For the first time in months, he felt the tension in his chest release a little. The project that had consumed his nights, his nerves, and his time with Emily was finally a success. Shall we celebrate this evening? Suggested one of the colleagues, Tom, already taking out his phone to make a reservation at the bar. You deserve it, Jake. Let's relax. Jacob thought about it. Normally, he would agree after such tension. Drinking beer with colleagues seemed like a logical end to the day. But the image of Emily popped into my head. How she sat alone at home, how she looked at the untouched dinner, how her voice trembled with disappointment on the phone. She had been waiting for him too long, and he knew it. No, guys, he shook his head. I passed. I want to go home. Emily. She's been through enough because of my job. Tom grinned. Well, you are truly an exemplary husband. Okay, we'll have fun without you. But you know where to find us if you change your mind. Jacob nodded and began to gather his things. On his way out, he suddenly realized that simply returning home empty-handed was not what he wanted. Emily deserved better. For the first time in a long time, he felt the urge to do something special to show her that he was still the same Jacob who had once greeted her with flowers at the door. He stopped at a small Italian restaurant that he and Emily had loved in the early years of their marriage. Ordered her favorite pasta with truffles and tiramisu for dessert. Then I stopped at a flower shop and chose a bouquet of white lilies. She always said they smelled like summer. Finally, he wrote her a message. I'm waiting for you at home at 7. I have a surprise. Smiling, he pressed send and drove home, anticipating her reaction. Meanwhile, Emily stood in the gallery, surrounded by empty walls and boxes of equipment. Nathan's exhibit was due to open in a week, and today he planned to set up the main structures and test the lighting. She came here straight from the office, taking with her sketches and a laptop. Her thoughts were busy with work, but somewhere on the periphery of her consciousness Nathan's words loomed, I like you. She tried not to think about it, but his voice still sounded in her head. Nathan appeared at the door with 2 cups of coffee in his hands and his usual smile. Hi, he said, handing her 1 cup. I thought we could use a boost of energy. Thank you. Emily took the coffee, trying not to meet his gaze any longer than necessary. Let's start with the central arch. I want to check how light hits it from different angles. Great idea. Nathan nodded and put his cup on the windowsill. Let's go. They got to work, Nathan raising the stands, Emily adjusting the lamps, checking how the shadows fell on the walls. At some point, she bent down to adjust the wire, and Nathan, who was standing next to her, accidentally touched her with his elbow, trying to hold the shaky structure. Oh, sorry, he laughed, holding the counter. It seems I'm not cut out for hard work. Emily smiled too, involuntarily relaxing. It's okay. The main thing is that the stand does not collapse. They looked at each other, and there was silence between them for a second. Nathan quickly looked away, but not before Emily saw the warmth in his eyes. She cleared her throat, getting back to business. So, let's try from the other side. The work continued. They discussed the placement of photographs, argued about which pictures should be highlighted, and gradually the atmosphere became more and more relaxed. At some point, Nathan turned on music on his phone light jazz that filled the empty space of the gallery. It works better this way, he explained, noticing her surprised look. I don't argue, Emily answered, and without noticing, she began to slightly shake her head to the beat of the melody. They finished the arch and moved on to the side wall. Nathan handed her one of his photographs, a black and white photograph of an old man with a wrinkled face sitting on a bench in some European town. "This is one of my favorites," he said. "Look how the light falls on his hands. I want it to hang here at this angle." Emily took the photo, looking at it carefully. Their fingers accidentally touched, and she felt a slight prick in her chest. Looking up, she saw Nathan looking at her, not at the photograph, but at her. Emily turned away, pretending to check the lamp. Her heart was beating faster than she would like. She reminded herself that this was a job, that she was married, that Nathan was just a colleague. But his presence, his lightness and sincerity pulled her like a magnet. They continued to work and time flew by. When they were done with the main areas, Nathan suggested, "Maybe we can have a snack. There's a great taco truck nearby." After all this running around, I was hungry. Emily hesitated. She needed to go home, but she didn't want to end the evening so abruptly. "Okay, but not for long," she agreed. They went outside, where it was already dark. There was a taco truck a couple of blocks from the gallery, and they decided to walk. As they walked, Nathan told her about his trip to Mexico, where he photographed street vendors. "There was this guy who made tacos on the street, and I swear it was the best thing I ever tasted in my life," he said, gesturing. "I hope these will be at least half as tasty." Emily laughed. "You expect too much from a Chicago food truck." "Maybe you're right," he winked. "But with good company, even average tacos become a masterpiece." She felt her cheeks flush slightly and turned away, pretending to look at the passing cars. They walked to the van, ordered a couple of tacos, and sat down on a bench nearby. Nathan handed her a napkin, and their hands accidentally touched again. This time he did not immediately remove his hand, but slightly held it, looking into her eyes. "Emily," he began quietly, "I know you're married, and I don't want to complicate things. But I really feel good with you. Can you feel it?" She froze, not knowing what to answer. Her mind screamed, "Stop," but her heart yearned for this moment. "Nathan," she finally said, removing her hand, "let's not do this. I can't." He nodded, looking away. "Sorry, I shouldn't have." "It's okay," she answered, although everything inside was seething with contradictions. "Let's just eat and get back to work, okay?" They finished their tacos in silence and then returned to the gallery to finish the finishing touches. But the lightness between them disappeared, replaced by awkwardness. Emily looked at her watch. It was almost 9. She didn't even notice how time flew away. "I have to go," she said, gathering her things. "See you tomorrow?" "Of course," Nathan nodded. "Thank you for today. You're awesome." She smiled forcefully and went outside, feeling the cold air burn her face. Jacob sat in the living room, looking at the table he had set for dinner. He sent Emily a message back at 6, but there was no response. At first he thought that she was just busy, but with every minute his patience was melting. He called her twice. The phone was turned off. When the door finally slammed in the hallway, he stood up from the sofa, trying to contain his irritation. Emily came in, taking off her coat, and froze when she saw him. "Jacob, are you home?" She was surprised, noticing the flowers and food on the table. "Yes, I'm home," he answered, crossing his arms. "Where were you?" Emily frowned as she tossed her bag onto a chair. "Where have you been for the last months?" "At work, right? I work too, if that happens." "At least I warned you," he said sharply. "And you just turned off your phone and disappeared." "I've been waiting for you, Emily. I arranged a surprise, wanted to do something good, and you." She opened her mouth to protest, but fell silent. Taking out the phone, she pressed the button. The screen remained black. "The battery is low," she said quietly, looking at him. "I didn't know what you wrote." Jacob shook his head, his face a mixture of weariness and disappointment. "Great. Just great," he muttered, and, without another word, went into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. Emily remained standing in the living room, looking at the cold dinner and flowers. Her heart sank with guilt. She wanted to run after him, explain that she was in the gallery, that it was work, but the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she slowly walked over to the table, picked up one of the lilies, and brought it to her face, inhaling its scent. Her eyes filled with tears. She understood that this evening could have been their chance to fix something, but instead everything only got worse. And deep down she knew that part of her was still thinking about Nathan, about his smile, about how easy it was for her to be with him today. This thought burned her like a hot coal. Emily put the flower back in the vase and sat down on the sofa with her head in her hands. The silence of the house weighed on her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she didn't know how to move forward, neither with Jacob nor with herself. Jacob lay in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling. He heard Emily walking around the living room, but did not come out. He was angry that he himself did not know how to return them to old closeness. He closed his eyes, trying to sleep, but memories rose before him, their wedding, their first home, their laughter. Somewhere in the past, they had lost each other, and he wasn't sure if they could get it back. And behind the wall, Emily sat in the dark, clutching a dead phone in her hands, and thought that tomorrow she would have to meet Nathan again. And from this thought her heart beat, either from fear or from anticipation. The morning in the Reed house began with the usual silence, but today it seemed especially heavy, almost tangible. Emily was the first to wake up, as usual, and lay in bed, looking at the glare of the sun shining through the curtains. Jacob slept next to him, facing the wall, his breathing even but tense, as if even in his sleep he could not relax. She wanted to reach out, touch his shoulder, say something to break this wall of silence, but her fingers froze in the air. What could she say? Sorry I didn't answer yesterday. Let's talk. She tried earlier. She quietly stood up, pulled on her robe, and went to the kitchen. The coffee maker hummed, filling the air with a familiar aroma, but even this did not bring the usual comfort. Emily looked at the bouquet of lilies still on the table and felt a lump of guilt tighten in her chest. Last night could have been their chance, but instead they were once again separated on opposite sides of an invisible abyss. Jacob appeared in the kitchen about 20 minutes later, already dressed for work. His face was gloomy, there were shadows under his eyes. He silently took the mug, poured himself some coffee, and sat down at the table without looking at Emily. Good morning, she said quietly, just to break the silence. Morning, he answered briefly, without even raising his eyes from his mug. Emily pursed her lips. She wanted to ask how he slept, what he thought about yesterday, but instead she said, Did you go to bed late? Yes, he muttered. I was thinking about work. She nodded, although she knew that this was not the whole truth. They both understood that it was not just about work, but neither of them dared to talk about the main thing. The silence between them was like a thick fog. It hid everything they felt and became denser every day. Jacob finished his coffee, stood up, and took his phone out of his pocket. His eyebrows furrowed slightly as he read the message. Emily noticed this and asked, Did something happen? Yes, he sighed, putting away the phone. The boss wrote this morning, I'm going on a business trip this afternoon. I'll be back in 2 days. Where? She was surprised, although her voice remained level. In Milwaukee. We need to meet with the customer to discuss the details of the next project. He shrugged his shoulders as if it didn't matter. I'll warn you if anything changes. Okay, Emily replied, looking away. She wanted to say, What about us? Maybe we can talk before you leave. But instead, she simply added, Good luck there. Thank you, Jacob nodded. He took his briefcase, put on his jacket, and went to the door. Already in the corridor, he turned around. See you in a couple of days. See you, she echoed. The door closed, and Emily was left alone. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, listening to the clock tick, and felt something break inside her. They didn't talk again. Again, they put everything off until later, as if later could fix something. She knew that he was also suffering, that his silence was not indifference, but fatigue and fear. But she couldn't get through to him, and he couldn't get through to her. They lost contact simply because they were silent. Jacob drove to the office, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary. The morning conversation with Emily, if it could be called a conversation, left a bitter aftertaste. He wanted to apologize for yesterday, to explain that his harshness was from fatigue, that he really tried for the sake of both of them. But the words stuck in my throat, as always. He was afraid that if he started talking, he would say too much about how he, too, was lonely, how he missed their old life, how he was afraid that she was moving away. What if she responds in kind? Or, worse, won't answer? Colleagues were waiting for him in the office. Congratulations for yesterday's success had not yet subsided. Mark approached him with a smile. "Jake, are you ready for Milwaukee? The customer wants to personally shake your hand." "Ready," Jacob nodded, although he felt only emptiness inside. "When are we leaving?" "At 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Train, 2 hours on the way. You'll spend the night there, have meetings tomorrow, and back the day after tomorrow." "Got it," he replied, sitting down at the table to collect the documents. Emily arrived at the office later than usual. Her thoughts were scattered, but working on Nathan's exhibition required attention. Today was opening day, and final preparations took up all of her time. She was sitting at her laptop, checking her task list, when there was a knock on the door. "Hi," Nathan walked in with a smile, holding a box of frames in his hands. "Are you ready for the big day?" "Almost," she answered, trying to sound cheerful. "And you?" "I'm nervous, to be honest," he admitted, putting the box on the table. "This is my first exhibition of this scale, but with your help, everything looks better than I could have dreamed." Emily smiled, feeling his enthusiasm relieve her melancholy a little. "Thank you." They went to the gallery together. The day flew by in a bustle, installing frames, setting up lighting, finishing touches. By evening, the hall was transformed. Nathan's photographs came to life on the walls, each telling its own story. The guests began to arrive, and Emily and Nathan barely had time to greet them. The opening went off with a bang. People praised Nathan's work and approached Emily to thank her for the design. She felt proud, but somewhere inside there was still an emptiness. Jacob was on a business trip, and she didn't even know how to write to him about this evening. When the guests left, she and Nathan were left alone in the gallery. He opened a bottle of wine that someone had given him and handed her a glass. "To our success," he said, clinking glasses with her. "To success," Emily repeated, taking a sip. They sat on a bench in the center of the hall, surrounded by his photographs. The silence was comfortable, not like at home. Nathan turned to her. "You were amazing today. Thank you for making this possible." "It was your photographs that were taken this evening," she answered, looking at him. There was a warmth in his eyes that she hadn't seen in Jacob for so long. They talked about the exhibition, about his trips, about its design. The wine relaxed her, and at some point she found herself laughing at his jokes, that she was at ease with him. Nathan moved closer, and she didn't move away. "Emily," he said quietly, "I can't stop thinking about you." She froze, looking into his eyes. Her mind screamed, "Go away," but her body didn't listen. He leaned down and kissed her softly, carefully, but with such passion that it took her breath away. She answered without thinking, surrendering to the moment. After a while, they were already at his house. The night passed in a whirlwind of emotions: euphoria, desire, oblivion. Emily felt alive, desired, free, something she had been missing for so long. But when it was over and they lay in the dark, reality began to seep into her mind. The morning greeted her with bright light breaking through the curtains of an unfamiliar room. Nathan slept next to her, his arm resting on her waist. Emily looked at him, two feelings mixed in her chest: euphoria from what she experienced and horror from what she did. She crossed the line by violating her own principles. She stood up quietly, trying not to wake him, and began to pack her things. Her hands were shaking, her heart was pounding. "What have I done?" was spinning in my head. She looked at Nathan. He looked so calm, so happy. But this could not drown out her guilt. She quietly got ready and left his apartment, got into the car, and turned on the phone that she had charged at his place. The screen lit up, and she saw a message from Jacob sent last night. "Arrived in Milwaukee. Everything is fine. How are you?" Emily closed her eyes, feeling tears burning her eyelids. She didn't answer him yesterday, just as she didn't answer the day before. And now between them lay not only silence, but also her betrayal. She knew that she could not simply forget this night, nor could she pretend that nothing had changed. But she had no idea what to do next. Jacob returned from Milwaukee early this morning. The train arrived at the Chicago station at 6, and he, tired, but with some kind of inner decision, got into a taxi, heading home. 2 days away from Emily gave him time to think. He realized that he no longer wanted to live in this endless silence, that their marriage was hanging by a thread, and if they did not talk now, they would lose each other forever. The words he wanted to say were spinning in his head, about how hard it was for him, how much he missed her, how he was ready to try to fix everything. Emily woke up in her bed, but sleep did not bring relief. The night with Nathan still stood before my eyes like a vivid but painful dream. She felt crushed. The mixture of euphoria had long since evaporated, leaving only guilt and fear. She didn't know how she would look into Jacob's eyes, how she would live with this secret. Her phone was on her nightstand, and she saw his message from Milwaukee, but she never responded. What could she write? Everything is fine. That would be a lie. When the front door slammed, Emily flinched. She was sitting in the living room with a cup of cold tea when Jacob walked in, leaving his bag at the door. His face was tired, but there was some determination in his eyes. "Hello," he said, taking off his coat. "Are you home?" "Hello," she answered quietly, clutching the cup in her hands. "How was the trip?" "Okay," he shrugged, sitting down opposite her. "Tired, but everything went well. How are you?" Emily looked away. Her heart was beating so hard that she was afraid he would hear. So, she said honestly. There was a lot of work. Jacob nodded, looking at her carefully. He felt that something was wrong. Her voice was trembling. She avoided his eyes. He took a deep breath and decided. "Emily, let's talk. Right now. I can't do this anymore. We live like strangers, and I don't want to lose us. Let's figure out what's happening to us." She looked up at him, and there was so much pain in them that he froze. "Jacob," she began, but her voice broke. She swallowed and continued, I have to tell you something." He frowned, feeling something tighten inside him. "What's happened?" he asked quietly. Emily lowered her head, her fingers nervously fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. She knew that she couldn't hide it forever, that lying would only make everything worse, and honestly, she couldn't. But the words were difficult to come by. "While you were gone." She fell silent, gathering her strength. I spent the night with another man." The silence that followed was deafening. Jacob looked at her, not believing his ears. His face turned pale and his eyes widened, but he didn't say a word. Emily looked up, and his silence cut her more than any scream. "It was Nathan, the photographer I worked with," she continued, feeling tears welling in her eyes. "This happened after the opening of the exhibition. I don't know how this happened. I didn't want it to go this far, but I can't hide it from you. I'm sorry." Jacob stood up slowly, his hands shaking. He walked around the room, stopped at the window, and turned to her. There was so much pain and anger in his voice when he spoke that Emily cringed. "Are you serious?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "Jacob, she began, but he interrupted. "No, Emily, there is no need to explain anything." His voice broke into a scream. "Did you say everything?" Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she made no attempt to wipe them away. "I know I'm guilty," she said in a trembling voice. "I didn't want to hurt you." He clenched his fists, trying to hold back, but it was clear that he was on the verge. Emily stood up and stepped towards him, but he stepped back. "Don't come near me," he said sharply. "Leave." "Jacob, please," she begged. "Let's talk, "Leave," he shouted, pointing to the door. "Pack your things and get out." His words hit her like a slap in the face. She froze, looking at him, but in his eyes there was nothing but pain and rage. Emily realized that now he would not forgive her, that this conversation was the end. She nodded silently, wiped her tears, and went to the bedroom. She packed her things automatically. She threw clothes, cosmetics, and a laptop into her bag. Jacob remained in the living room, facing the window. When she walked out with the bag over her shoulder, He didn't even turn around. "Leave the keys on the table," he said coldly. Emily put the keys down, looked at him one last time, and left. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and she felt her legs give way. Getting into the car, she burst into tears, burying her face in the steering wheel. Everything that was between them collapsed in one moment, and she herself destroyed it. An hour later, Emily was already driving to the suburbs to her father's house. Robert lived in a small cottage half an hour from Chicago, surrounded by old oak trees and silence. She needed someone who would listen even if she judged. Robert opened the door, seeing her tear-stained face and a bag in her hands. His gray eyebrows furrowed. "Emily, what happened, girl?" he asked, letting her inside. She threw her bag at the threshold and collapsed on the sofa, covering her face with her hands. Robert sat down next to her and waited silently for her to speak. Finally, she raised her head and looked at him. "Dad, I ruined everything," she said, and her voice broke again. "I cheated on Jacob. He kicked me out of the house." Robert froze, his face becoming serious. He leaned back on the sofa, crossed his arms, and was silent for a long time, looking at her. "Tell me everything," he finally said. Emily began to speak haltingly, with pauses, jumping from one thing to another. She talked about the cold in their marriage, about loneliness, about Nathan, about the exhibition, and that night. Robert listened without interrupting, only occasionally shaking his head. When she finished, he sighed and looked into her eyes. "You acted very, very stupidly, girl," he said quietly but firmly. "I didn't think you were capable of this. You are not some frivolous girl. You have a husband and a family. How could you?" "I know, Dad," she whispered, looking down. "I hate myself for this." "Hate won't help here," he snapped. "You betrayed Jacob. You betrayed your vows. So what now? Do you think this photographer of yours will replace your husband? Or did you just run away from problems?" "I don't know," she admitted, and the tears flowed again. "I didn't want it to end like this. I'm lost." Robert shook his head, his voice softening, but the condemnation remained. "Getting lost is not an excuse. You're a grown woman, Emily. You had a choice, and instead of healing your marriage, you did the worst. Jacob may not be perfect, but he tried his best for you. And you broke everything you had." She was silent, feeling his words dig into her like needles. He was right, and that made the pain even worse. "Stay here as long as you need," Robert added, standing up. "But think about it, okay? What are you going to do next? It's not the end of the world, but you dug yourself a hole, and you will have to get out of it. I'm nearby, and understand, I'm not judging you. Everyone makes mistakes, but you'll have to deal with this yourself." He went into the kitchen, leaving her alone. Emily curled up on the couch, staring into space. Her life was falling apart, and she didn't know how to put it back together. Emily spent the first days with her father in a kind of daze. Her world had collapsed, and she didn't know how to move on. Robert's house, surrounded by old trees and the quiet of the suburbs, became a temporary refuge, but even here she could not hide from her thoughts. Jacob didn't call or write, and this silence was worse than any condemnation. Nathan sent one message, a short, "How are you?" But she didn't answer. She needed time to understand herself, although she doubted that this was even possible. Robert, despite his sternness that first evening, did not press her. He gave her a room on the second floor, the same one where she lived as a child, and silently watched as she tried to find at least some rhythm in her new reality. On the third day, he knocked on her door early in the morning. "Emily, get up," he said through the door. "Let's go to the garden. There's plenty of work there. It's not a good idea to sit cooped up all day." She reluctantly went downstairs, pulling on her father's old jacket and sneakers. The garden behind the house was small but well-kept. Robert always loved to tinker with the soil. Now, at the beginning of autumn, the leaves have already begun to turn yellow, and the flower beds require cleaning. He handed her the pruning shears and pointed to the rose bushes. "You'll cut them," he said briefly, "and I'll take care of the beds." Emily nodded and got to work. The cold air was invigorating, and the monotonous movements helped to distract. They worked in silence, only occasionally exchanging short phrases. "Give me a shovel, there's a weed here." But gradually the silence became softer, and Robert, straightening up over the garden bed, looked at her. "Do you remember how you loved to dig here as a child?" he asked, wiping his hands on his pants. "She was always carrying my tools, building some houses out of branches." Emily smiled faintly as she trimmed a dead branch. "Yes, I remember. You swore that I was breaking your roses, and you still tore them," he chuckled. "She said that you were making bouquets for your great love." She froze, looking at the rose in her hands. Her childhood dreams surfaced in her memory, naive, bright, full of faith that love would be eternal and ideal. She then imagined a prince who would carry her in his arms, like in the fairy tales she read before bed. "I really dreamed of great love," she said quietly. "I thought that I would find someone with whom everything would be simple and beautiful." Robert nodded, leaning on the shovel. "And then you met Jacob," he continued. "I saw how you shone at the wedding. I thought you could do it." Emily lowered the pruning shears, her eyes misty. "I thought so too, Dad. But everything has become so complicated. I don't know when we lost each other." He sighed, looking at her with some mixture of pity and severity. "Love is not always simple, girl. This is not a fairy tale. Sometimes it requires work and patience, and sometimes people make mistakes." Emily looked at him, feeling that there was something personal hidden behind his words. "Are you talking about me?" she asked quietly. "Both about you and about myself," he answered, looking away. "I'm not a saint either, Emily. Maybe it's time for you to find out." She was surprised. Robert rarely talked about the past, especially his marriage to her mother, who died when Emily was 15. She knew their relationship wasn't always smooth sailing, but he never shared details. "What do you mean?" she asked, sitting down on a bench next to the flower bed. Robert paused, as if collecting his thoughts, then sat down next to him, putting the shovel on the ground. "When your mother was just over 30, I cheated on her," he finally said, looking into the distance. "It was a long time ago, you were still little. I then worked at a construction site and traveled a lot to sites. I met a woman. Nothing serious, just got carried away. I thought it would remain a secret, that I could keep everything under control." Emily froze, unable to believe her ears. Her father, the strict and principled Robert, always seemed to her a man who was not capable of such a thing. "And what happened next?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Mom found out," he continued. "I don't know how exactly, but she was always smarter than me. I came home one day and asked directly, 'Are you dating someone?' At first I denied it, but she looked me in the eyes, and I couldn't lie. I posted everything." He fell silent, fiddling with the edge of his sleeve. Emily saw how hard it was for him to remember this. "She kicked me out," he said finally. "She told me to get out and not come back. I stayed with a friend for a couple of weeks and thought it was all over. But then I realized that I didn't want to lose her, that it was stupidity, a momentary weakness. I returned and begged her to forgive." Kneeling, Emily, "He promised never again." "And she forgave?" she asked, feeling her voice tremble. "Not right away," he nodded. "She couldn't believe me for a long time. But I tried. Every day proved that she was the most important thing to me. Over time, she softened. We were able to start again, although the scar remained. Until the end of her life, she sometimes looked at me as if she was waiting for me to lose control again. But I didn't lose it." Emily was silent, digesting his words. Her father, the man she considered infallible, had gone through the same thing as her. But he found his way back, and she didn't even know if she wanted to go back. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked finally. "I didn't want you to think badly of me," he admitted. "And I didn't think you'd need it. And now I see that you are in the same hole where I was." Emily lowered her head, looking at her hands, stained with earth. "Do you think Jacob will forgive me?" she asked quietly. Robert shrugged. "I don't know, girl. It's up to him. And from you. Do you want him to forgive? Do you want to come back?" She didn't answer right away. Her thoughts were confused. She missed Jacob, their home, what they used to have. But Nathan, he awakened something in her that she hadn't felt in a long time, and it scared her. "I don't know, Dad," she admitted. "I'm confused. I think I destroyed everything I could." Robert put his hand on her shoulder, squeezing it. "You made a mistake, it's true," he said, "but life doesn't end with mistakes. The question is, what will you do next? Run from it or try to fix it? I chose the latter, and it was hard, but worth it. And you have to decide for yourself." He stood up, took a shovel, and returned to the beds. Emily remained seated, looking at the roses. Her childhood dreams of great love now seemed so distant. She thought about her mother, how she had found the strength to forgive, and about Jacob, who might never be able to. The day passed in work and silent reflection. In the evening, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, she looked at the sunset and for the first time in days felt something like hope. Not that everything will return, but that she can find a way out, whatever it may be. Emily sat at the old wooden table in her childhood room, staring at a blank piece of paper. The pen shook in her hand as she tried to find the words. She decided to write a letter to Jacob, not to justify herself, but to express everything that had accumulated in her soul. It was like a confession that she couldn't say out loud. "Jacob, I don't know where to start. Probably because I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I did, for that night, for the pain I caused you. I didn't mean for it to happen, but that's no excuse. I know I broke our trust, and I understand why you kicked me out. I miss you. I miss our evenings when we could just sit and talk about everything. I miss your laughter, your hands, your voice. I lost it, and it's my fault. But I want you to know that I loved you. Everything we had was real, even if I ruined the ending. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I'm not sure if you can forgive, but I want you to be happy. You deserve this more than anyone. Emily." She reread the letter several times, feeling tears dripping onto the paper, smearing the ink. But she did not send it. She folded the sheet in half and put it in her desk drawer. The letter was for her a way to speak out, but it could not replace a real conversation. Emily knew she had to face Jacob. Only then will they be able to put an end to it, or perhaps find a new path. She called him the next day. The phone buzzed for a long time, and she already thought that he would not answer, but finally heard his voice. "Emily?" There was surprise in him, mixed with fatigue. "Hello," she said quietly. "Can we meet? We need to talk." He paused, and she could almost hear him weighing her words. "Okay," he finally answered. "Where?" "In Lincoln Park. Tomorrow at noon," she suggested, remembering how they once walked there together. "Agreed," he said briefly and hung up. The next day, Emily arrived at the park early. The autumn wind blew yellow leaves along the paths, and the benches were almost empty. She chose one by the lake, sat down and waited, nervously fiddling with the edge of her scarf. Her heart was pounding, she didn't know what to expect, but she felt that this conversation would be decisive. Jacob showed up promptly at noon. He looked tired, but collected. A dark coat, hands in his pockets, direct gaze. Seeing her, he nodded and sat down next to her, leaving a small distance between them. "Hello," he said, looking at the water. "Hello," she replied, trying to smile. "Thank you for coming." He shrugged without looking at her. "You wanted to talk. I'm here." Emily took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "Jacob, I want to apologize. For everything. For what I did, for not saying earlier how bad I felt. I'm not making excuses for myself, but I want you to know why this happened." He turned to her, his eyes somewhere between pain and curiosity. "Why?" he asked quietly. She nodded, looking at her hands. "I missed you," she began. "The last months. You were somewhere far away, even when you were at home. I felt alone, like I was living with a shadow. I missed you, the way we used to talk, laugh, cook dinners, watch movies, and you came late, tired, and I didn't know how to reach you. You didn't notice me. I blamed you, I was offended, but I was silent. And then Nathan showed up, and he gave me the warmth that I couldn't find at home. It was wrong, I know, but I turned out to be too weak." Jacob listened without interrupting. His face remained expressionless, but his fingers clenched into fists. When she fell silent, he spoke. "Do you think it was easy for me?" His voice was low, with a hint of bitterness. "I was working hard, Emily. Every day, this project, it was like a weight around my neck. People, money, and reputation depended on me. I didn't sleep at night trying to figure it all out. I thought that if I made more money, if I closed this project, we could start again. But you didn't wait." Emily felt tears sting her eyes, but held back. "It's my fault," she said, "but you also withdrew into yourself. We both stopped talking. I didn't know how to tell you that I was lonely, and you didn't say how hard it is for you. We lost each other long before that night." Jacob turned away, looking at the lake. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't argue. They sat in silence, listening to the rustling of leaves and the distant voices of passers-by. Finally, he spoke again. "I miss you, Emily, the way it was before, for us, but you broke us completely." Her heart sank. She reached out her hand, but stopped short of touching him. "I'm so sorry, Jacob," she whispered. "I would give anything to turn back time. But I can't, and you're right, what I did cannot be erased." He nodded, slowly, as if agreeing to something inevitable. "We're both to blame," he said. "I wasn't there when you needed me. You left when I tried to hold on. But what was, it cannot be returned. Too much pain." Emily wiped away a tear that was rolling down her cheek. "Do you think we can start again?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. Jacob looked at her, and there was sadness in his eyes, but not anger. "No," he said quietly. "We will drag this along with us, and it will finish us off. It's better to let go." She nodded, feeling something inside her completely breaking. But there was also a relief in this. They finally told each other the truth. "I don't want to hate you," he added. "We were together for 10 years. This means something. Maybe we can remain friends. Not now, but in time." "I would like that," she replied. "You will always be important to me." They fell silent, looking at the water. Then Jacob stood up. "Then, divorce," he said calmly. Emily stood up next, her voice weak but firm. "Fine. It will be right." He nodded, put his hands in his pockets, and looked at her. "Good luck, Emily," he said. "Take care of yourself." "And you, Jacob," she replied. He turned and walked along the path, his figure gradually dissolving among the trees. Emily remained standing, feeling the wind cool her face. This was the end of their story, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and honest. They let each other go, retaining at least an ounce of respect for what they had. She returned to the car, sat behind the wheel, and sat for a long time, looking into emptiness. The home they shared would soon become someone else's. Their lives will be divided in half, like a bank account. But there was something liberating about it. They both accepted that they couldn't move on together. And maybe over time they can actually become friends. In the meantime, she had to learn to live again alone. 5 years flew by in a blur, leaving behind a trail of changes, lessons, and new beginnings. Each of them found their own path, but the shadow of the past remained with them, not as a burden, but as a quiet reminder of who they were and who they became. Emily stood at the window of her small studio in the West Loop, looking out over the morning city. She was 37, and her green eyes now showed not only fatigue, but also calm confidence. After the divorce, she stayed with her father for several more months, helping him in the garden and trying to pick up the pieces. Then it seemed to her that life was over, that she would never recover from the feeling of guilt and loss. But time, as always, turned out to be the best healer. She returned to Chicago 6 months later, renting a tiny apartment and focusing on work. Design became her salvation. Every project, every line on the drawing helped her take her mind off thoughts about the past. Nathan's exhibition, the one that turned her life upside down, received good reviews, and her name as a designer began to be heard in professional circles. This gave her an impetus. She took on new orders, from the design of galleries to the interiors of private houses. Over time, she opened her own small office, hiring 2 assistants, Linda, her old colleague, and a young college graduate named Mike. Nathan called her several times after that night, but she cut off contact. It was too painful for her to look at him, knowing that he was the catalyst for her downfall. He left Chicago a year later on another trip South Africa, I think, and she never heard from him again. Sometimes, seeing black and white photographs in magazines, she remembered his smile, but it no longer caused either guilt or melancholy. Her personal life remained empty for a long time. She went on dates, but could not get close to anyone. The fear of repeating the mistake kept her at a distance. Everything changed 2 years ago when she met David. He was an architect, a tall and taciturn man with kind eyes. They met at one of the projects. He designed a house, and she designed the interior. Their relationship developed slowly, first coffee after meetings with contractors, then long walks around the city, talking about books and music. David didn't rush her, and that was exactly what she needed. Now they lived together in her apartment, not luxurious, but cozy, with pastel walls and bright accents that she loved so much. David brought stability into her life, but not boredom. He knew how to listen, support, and more importantly, was not afraid to talk about his feelings. This morning she was preparing for an important meeting. Her office was commissioned to design a new cultural center in the city center, a large project that could take her career to the next level. She was standing at the mirror, straightening her hair, when David came up from behind, putting his arm around her waist. "You look amazing," he said, kissing her neck. "They will be delighted." "I hope so," she smiled, turning to him. "This is important to me." "I know," he nodded. "You can handle it, as always." They had breakfast together, avocado toast and coffee, their usual ritual. David went to his construction site, and Emily packed her briefcase with sketches and went to the office. The day passed in a bustle, meetings, discussions, edits. By evening she was tired, but felt satisfied. The project promised to be interesting. When she returned home, she noticed a letter in her mailbox. The envelope was plain, without a return address, but the handwriting seemed familiar. Opening it, she froze. It was an invitation to a wedding. From Jacob. Jacob stood on the balcony of his home in the Chicago suburbs, looking out over his neatly manicured lawn. He was 39, and the first streaks of gray had appeared in his dark hair, signs of stress and time. After the divorce, he sold his and Emily's house, as they had agreed, and divided the money in half. It was fair, just as he promised in the park. Then he thought that selling the house would be the last point, but it turned out that this was only the beginning of his new life. The first months after the breakup were difficult. He lived in a rented apartment, went to work, but felt lost. The success of the project, which he completed before the divorce, brought him a promotion. He became the head of the department, but this did not add joy. He missed Emily, their routine, her presence, even if it was silent. The night she confessed to cheating still burned him, but over time the anger subsided, replaced by sadness and understanding. He knew that he was no less to blame. His detachment, his inability to talk about his feelings pushed her over the edge. He started seeing a psychologist 6 months after the divorce. It wasn't his style. He always thought he could handle it on his own, but the loneliness became unbearable. The sessions helped him understand himself. He realized that he had been hiding behind work for too long, that he was afraid to show his vulnerability. The psychologist, an elderly woman with a soft voice, once told him, "You are not a robot, Jacob. You have the right to feel." These words stuck with him, and he began to learn to be open first with himself, then with others. Work remained an important part of his life, but he no longer allowed it to consume everything. He took days off and went fishing with friends. 2 years later, he bought a house in the suburbs, not big, but with a garden and a spacious veranda, where he liked to drink coffee in the morning. His personal life came to life later. He was not looking for a relationship, but fate decreed otherwise. At one of the work conferences, he met Kate, an engineer from another company. She was short, with short brown hair and a keen sense of humor. Their conversation began with a discussion of the project and ended with dinner at a restaurant. Kate was straightforward but warm, and with her, Jacob felt like he could be himself for the first time. They started dating, and a year later, he proposed to her. This was not an impulsive decision, as with Emily in her youth, but a conscious one. Kate knew about his past. He told her everything on one of the first dates, not hiding either Emily's infidelity or his role in the collapse of the marriage. She listened without judging and said, "We all make mistakes. The main thing is what you do with it next." Her words became an anchor for him. Now they were preparing for the wedding. It will be a small ceremony, just close friends and family, in the garden of their home. Jacob wanted everything to be simple, without unnecessary pomp. Kate supported him, adding only one condition: "I want a cake with chocolate." He laughed and agreed. In the morning, before sending the invitations, he thought for a long time whether to invite Emily. They had not communicated directly since that day in the park, but they had crossed paths a couple of times by chance on the street in a cafe. Both nodded to each other, exchanged a quick "How are you?" and went their separate ways. He knew that she had opened her own office, that everything was going well for her, and this made him happy. In the end, he decided to send her an invitation, not out of a desire to prove anything, but because she was a part of his life, and he wanted her to know that he was moving on. Emily arrived for the wedding on Saturday. She doubted for a long time whether it was worth it, but in the end she decided that it would be right to close the last page of their story. She wore a simple sea green dress and pulled her hair into a low bun. David went with her. No, he wasn't jealous. He knew her story. They tried to talk about everything from the very beginning. Jacob's garden was decorated with garlands and flowers. There were few guests, about 20 people. Everyone was laughing, drinking wine, talking. Emily noticed Jacob immediately. He was standing at the refreshment table, wearing a dark gray suit, next to a woman who must have been Kate. She was pretty, with lively eyes, and held his hand. Emily looked at David. He silently kissed her and looked approvingly. They approached closer, and Jacob noticed her. His face lit up with surprise and then a soft smile. "Emily," he said, stepping towards her. "You came." "Yes," she nodded, smiling back. She introduced David. "Very nice to meet you, David." Mutually, "Congratulations." And Kate, right? Kate turned, her gaze warm and curious. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you. Jacob told me a lot about you." Emily shook her hand, feeling slightly embarrassed. "I hope only good things," she joked. "Only the truth," Kate answered with a smile. "Thank you for coming." They talked for a couple of minutes about the weather, about the garden, about how delicious the cake was. Then Kate and David went to the guests, leaving them alone. Jacob looked at Emily, and there was something familiar, but already distant, in his eyes. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I heard you have your own bureau." "Yes, everything is fine," she nodded. "I'm working on a big project now." "And you?" "Life is getting better," he said. "Kate, she's special. With her, I feel like I belong." "I'm happy for you," Emily said sincerely. "You deserve happiness." "And you too," he replied. "David looks at you like that." "Yes, he's very good," she nodded. "He is an architect. We've been together for 2 years now." Jacob smiled wider. "Fine. So everything worked out for both of us." They fell silent, looking at the guests. The music was playing quietly, and someone was dancing on the lawn. Emily suddenly felt that this was their last real conversation, not as ex-spouses, but as people who had once loved each other. "You know," she said, "I sometimes think about what happened. I don't regret it, but I think—" "Me too," he admitted. "But that's the past. We did what we could, and it was probably right to let go." "Yes," she agreed. "We were a good couple, while we could." He nodded, and there was no resentment or regret in his gaze, only acceptance. "Stay for the cake," he said. Kate insisted on chocolate. "Definitely," she laughed. The wedding was easy and warm. Emily and David stayed until the end, tried the cake, it really was delicious, and said goodbye to Jacob and Kate. As she left, she turned around. He was hugging his wife, laughing at something she said. Emily smiled, thinking that she was very glad that the pain she caused him did not break him. Another year has passed. Emily and David got married quietly at City Hall, with dinner among friends. Her office grew, and she became a well-known name in Chicago design circles. She learned to appreciate what she had and no longer looked back with longing. Jacob and Kate gave birth to a daughter. He still worked at his company, but now found time for his family. Sometimes he would meet Emily in town, and they would exchange short greetings like old friends. Their paths diverged, but each of them found their own happiness. The past remains where it belongs in memory, like a quiet melody that no longer sounds, but still reminds of itself in rare moments of silence. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.